So, hope everyone's all right.
Hello, Venerable Robina. Great to see you.
Yes, darling. Hello, Jeff and Nina. Jeff and Nina still there in Timbuktu, or you're, yes, still in Timbuktu.
Still in Timbuktu, but on our way out.
Well, any minute now, I'll give you a hug.
Yes, soon. We will be in touch. I think next week we'll arrive.
Have you told people this news or not?
I think so. Not in detail.
Well, then tell people what's happening. Just if whatever you want to say. There's Nina,
so,
who's the ex-director of Laksam, who initiated this 12-month program, this crazy 12-month program of busy Thursdays. Go on, Nina, tell us what's happening.
Yes, so Jeff and I, after about 20 years of corporate life, are moving on to do something more meaningful, hopefully. And we left our jobs and we're going to move to New Mexico, in fact, about 2 hours from where Venerable Robina lives. And our plan is to do as much practice as we manage and as much retreat as we manage for as long as
you can bear digging into the dirt. As long as you can bear. One of my friends said, as she's a therapist, she said, being a Buddhist, especially doing retreat, you got your hands in your own shit. So as long as you can bear all the shit and maybe get a bit of bliss on the side, Nina, then you'll persevere. Okay?
I know. Lama Zopa said, as long as you enjoy it, just do it. And when you stop enjoying it, stop. So we will just have to. So if we stop very quickly, you will know. You will know why.
You either couldn't stand it or you got all the realizations. We won't know which one, will we?
Probably the first one.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll be able
the probability is higher on the first one.
Well, Nina and Jeff arrive soon, and then I whiz off to Australia, New Zealand, and Nepal. So I'll see her briefly. We can have a couple.
When are you leaving, Venerable?
August the 3rd. So you better get here before then.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are.
Next week.
Good.
We'll be in touch.
Good. Yes. I
think we'll make it.
Darling people, we're all here to continue this ridiculous one of having our hands in your SHIT, this transforming problems, this crazy idea of practice. We'll continue this one today. And then we think we're all here together to do that, to continue listening to these teachings, to continue to take some tools from it so we can develop our amazing potential, so we can be a benefit to ourselves, which goes without saying, and to others. So Lars will lead us in this little prayer. So again, to remind us, not just to be mindless as a bunch of weird Tibetan words, what we're thinking is imagining all the marvelous things of the world, all the things that people use that make people happy, all the objects of our senses. You know, we're piling them all up and making an offering to the Buddha as a request for these teachings. Okay, it's coming out of my Australian mouth, but we hope there's some blessings coming through from the holy beings that I'm fortunate to have some contact with. That's the idea, you know. I remember Lama Zopa Rinpoche said one time, which made my mind very happy, because I know what my limitations are. I know what I know and what I don't know. And I remember he said, the main benefit that comes from what's happening? The main benefit that comes from a person's teachings isn't their own knowledge, but is their pure samaya. So this is something I find very beneficial. But if we think we do our practice, we have, you know, confidence in our teachers and confidence in the path, which I try to cultivate, then the words we say will be of benefit, because the energy of the blessings of the beings will come through. So that should make us all very happy. So we offer this mandala to the holy beings, to the Buddha, as a request for these teachings.
Since on vacation, we'll try to fill in for him.
Okay, good.
Sajipeki Jukshin metok tramri rablingji nidegen padi sangye jingdu mite ulwai drokunam dagjin la chupa Jetsun Lama Dampa Kyenam Ki Chu Kiu Kala Kien Sei Chu Jin Trik Jitar Tsampe Nu Je Din Mahala Zabge Chuki Charpa Waptu Sol Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniyatayami.
So imagine that Buddha so happily receives our offering. And then now we can just reiterate our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And then secondly, stating this purpose for our being together, this goal we have. The Lamas call it our motivation. So we're going to listen to these teachings. So I'll say it first in English. I'll say a bit extensive, more extensive in English than 2 times we can sing in Tibetan. So what we're thinking is, until we are enlightened, until we become a Buddha, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then by the virtuous karmic seeds we leave in our mind, by listening to these teachings, and that includes me, I promise, may we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes. And then we're, of course, perfectly qualified to benefit sentient beings. So it's a really long-term view. Try and have that in our minds. Sangye chadang soke chognam la, jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi, dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki, drola penshir sangye dropa shok. Sangye chadang soke chognam la, jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi, dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki, drola penshir sangye dropa shok. Okay, that's 3 times. Okay, so let's continue this outrageous practice of learning to like problems like we like ice cream. So the real one beneath it is to get the logic of it. Why would we want to do this? Well, it's not illogical. In just the same way that if you're going to the gym, if you're learning to play music, if you're learning to be a tennis player and you want to be successful, your goal is to become like Federer, your goal is to become like Bach, your goal is to become like Einstein. We understand this. We know you have to make effort. So this is something we'll discuss now. This is in the Sex Perfections of the Bodhisattva coming later, but we'll discuss that now because it's totally relevant here. We know we can't possibly achieve something that we haven't achieved already without making effort. And it's that point where you meet the struggle, where you meet the pain in the body, where you're squeezing your brain trying to internalize this new information. That's where the effort is. That's where the effort is needed. And that's what's called a problem. You see, when we understand from our high school, from middle scope, the depth of attachment. As Lama says, I can tell you about attachment for 1 whole year, and we will never begin to understand it until we start to really look deeply inside. It's way more subtle, more pervasive, more profound than we even can pretend to imagine, you know. Attachment completely drives us. We are a body of attachment. We are the 5 senses. From eons of practicing attachment is what literally has given us a body of the 5 senses, and which is what has literally created the external world of the 5 senses. This is the result of countless lifetimes of karma, of practicing attachment. So attachment is this junkie in us, this fragile, demented, poor junkie in us that can only stand the nice things. This is the real point. It can only bear the nice feelings, pleasant sounds, pleasant taste, pleasant smell. And so it's desperate to only have nice feelings. So now we know the second when you're doing those push-ups at the gym, because you've got the goal of becoming fit, the second the muscles start to hurt, which is the second that attachment is having a panic attack because it doesn't like unpleasant feelings. That's when the effort starts. And that's what's called a problem. So then you have to literally, and this is what we're going to discuss today, emptiness, reinterpret that moment. The instinct of attachment is, oh my God, no, I can't stand this, go away. So you stop. That's how we live our lives. We are desperate to stay in our comfort zone. desperate to only get what attachment wants, second by second. So we have to reinterpret that moment, calling a problem good. So a problem by definition is what attachment doesn't want. A problem by definition is when the moment of aversion arises. And after eons of habit, it interprets this as bad. We have to learn to call it good. So what's the logic? We understand it when it comes to learning to become Einstein, Bach, or Federer. No one complains. Everybody honors a person who pushes against the pain. We admire that perseverance. But like I always say, when it comes to emotional things, we are less than infants. We understand transforming problems into happiness when it comes to daily life goals. I mean, this is so obvious. When we have enthusiasm to work hard, to become rich, to do all the other things, the samsaric things, we understand transforming problems. We just don't call it that. But as soon as we are discussing emotions, we are like infants. We are like absolutely fragile infants. We can't stand not getting what attachment wants. This is what we learn in high school. Now we are really applying these teachings here. So why would we want? So what is the goal here? It's not Einstein, it's not Federer, it's not Bach, it's Buddha. We're trying to become a Buddha. We're trying to perfect our goodness and eradicate the rubbish. That's the job we're trying to do from the second we start practicing all the way to Buddhahood. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. So of course, it's hard to see the benefits of being like that. I mean, we love to read about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We love to hear about Lama Zopa Rinpoche and our lamas and their amazing qualities. It does inspire us. But if we just put them on a pedestal, oh, but that's just the Dalai Lama. That's insulting the Dalai Lama. Why do you think he's got a human body? He doesn't need a body, a bag of bones. He's done the job. That's just the point about these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The only reason they've got a body is to show us what we can become. So it's insulting them to go, oh, that's just Lama Zopa. You know, like as Venerable Roger says about Lama Zopa, for Rinpoche, sleep is a disgusting waste of time. I mean, this is horrific to hear. Oh, and then we say, oh, but that's just Lama Zopa. I'm an ordinary person. Then you'll never become like that. That's like going to the tennis. Oh, but that's just Federer. I can't become like that. It's not true. You can. So when you know you can, then you get this enthusiasm and then you can really greet the problems and you like them. I mean, even when I just did Kung Fu, boring old Kung Fu. I mentioned when I was back in London in the 80s, well, I first started in the 70s, and then when I became a nun, I did it again in London in the 80s, and I trained 6 days a week. I loved it. I'd come home after 3 hours of training every day of the week. I wouldn't even eat after lunch because I wanted to have a fit body. You know, I was completely fanatic. And the last meal I'd eat would be lunchtime, and then I'd go to my class at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, train for 3 hours, and come home absolutely exhausted, lying in my bath with arnica in it, my aching muscles, but my mind was happy. I mean, this is really not complicated. We really do understand this. But when it comes to regular emotions and being abused by your husband and all these wretched verses we hear when you learn to take the blame when someone accuses you, seeing the person who abuses you as your guru, this is like out of it was too much for our poor fragile minds, you know. We can't cope. But this is what the practice is. And why are we trying to do this? Because obviously, making the effort to go beyond that moment of when the comfort zone is threatened, this is the logic of it. A problem by definition is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. If you've given up attachment, by definition, you don't have problems. As you know, someone could abuse you daily, cut off this hand, cut off the other hand, cut off this leg, cut off that leg. If you've got bodhicitta and emptiness, you'll be like Kirti Senchab Rinpoche said for one bodhisattva, that the action of cutting off his hand or her hand to feed a starving animal, that action is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. That's not crazy, right? You wouldn't even have a problem. So clearly we're dealing with what's called a problem because we still have attachment and aversion and the other delusions. So we are greeting these moments. Why? Because we are trying to get this amazing bodhicitta. We're trying to become a Buddha because we can't stand the thought of others suffering. That's what motivates people like Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, and all the rest of them. They've got the ability as great yogis to do what they like. They can manifest in countless bodies already. They don't need boring old bodies. What causes them to never give up is compassion. This is what's hard to imagine. So what drives this kind of practice is compassion. which is why it's so exhausting for us. We love to hear about the compassion of these holy beings. But I mean, we know how hard it is to have compassion for just one person. Can you imagine having that for everybody? These holy people, this is what they've got. So it's hard work. I mean, the instinct of not liking problems is 1 billion times stronger than the instinct of not knowing how to play tennis or Bach. They're easy peasy, falling off a log easy in comparison with this one. These are eons old, these habits. So that's why I've got to understand the logic of it, not just become some martyr. You know, that's pathetic. So this is where emptiness comes in. Without some semblance of understanding dependent arising and emptiness, forget bodhicitta, okay? But without some semblance of wisdom, this practice is insane. Because when you're at the ordinary level, like most of us, and you just sit there in the view of being a victim, you can't, you know, when your boyfriend's mean to you, when the person doesn't love you, when the person doesn't stroke you, when the boss doesn't thank you, when the person on the road doesn't give you what you want, when the moment by moment, every second, when attachment doesn't get what it wants, mainly the attachment of being approved of, then it's an absolute problem. It's a problem that exists from its own side with absolute certainty, set in stone, absolutely self-existent problem, real problem, self-existent problem, definite problem, having not interdependent, nothing to do with my mind, nothing to do with karma, absolute out there, a problem. That's the world, and that's the nightmare of our suffering. So beginning to understand dependent arising, that things don't have an intrinsic nature, that a problem also is something that's dependent arising. A problem also is empty of existing from its own side, which means it doesn't have an intrinsic nature, and especially is something that absolutely exists in dependence upon the mind that calls it a problem. This is where we begin to have some sense of courage to practice this. Bodhicitta compels us to do it, but the wisdom is what enables us to do it, you know. So as Lama Zopa said one time, when you don't feel abused, where is the abuse? This is too shocking in the West. We don't like talking like this. This is too shocking, you know. And this is, of course, the substance of the 8 verses. It's when you've been abused by others. I mean, I forget if I think we went through the last ones, didn't we or not? I can't remember. We did. The first one is about, you know, all sentient beings are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel, €1 billion. And then we're going to see ourselves the lowest of all and delight in others' good qualities. And then we start to see our mind and avert the delusions. And then those next 3, seeing the crazy people out there and seeing them as like we found a precious treasure, like the psychopaths and the pedophiles, the ones out there in the world, these suffering beings, the grist for our mill for us to develop compassion. Getting closer to home, when you're accused of something you didn't do, you take the blame and offer the victory to the others. And the third one, the most painful, it seems to me, the closest to home, your beloved husband, your beloved child, whom you've sacrificed your life for, they give you up. The pain of this must be unbearable. So see that as your most precious guru. This is hard to swallow. These are hard to bear, these instructions, you know. But when we begin to understand karma, already with karma, you see, karma is the explicit teaching in junior school, in the first scope. It's explicitly saying, don't kill, steal, lie, Rabina, because you know you don't want future suffering, honey child, and these will cause you suffering, so stop doing them. It's all for your own sake. You're the beneficiary of this first level of practice. But the implicit teaching already, the implicit teaching of karma, it's the most perfect, marvelous example of the first level of dependent arising. There are 3 levels of dependent arising, which is the logic to prove emptiness, which we only really explicitly talk about in the 6 perfections, the last of the 6, which we're getting to the next module. So, but implicitly, it's there with karma. Karma is the law of cause and effect. And the first level of dependent arising is that you exist independently. You are yourself exists in dependence upon past causes. I remember when I studied with Geshe Tekchok, my philosophy teacher, in the late 70s in England. And he used the example of the person called Rabina, which is of course why I remember. He said, it can be said that everything in the universe up to the first moment of Robina is validly a cause and a condition for the existence of Robina. I thought that was pretty cosmic. Think about that. So dependent arising in terms of cause and effect already begins to shake ego grasping, mainly in terms of realizing that when you realize you're not some innocent victim, that your mother didn't make you, your father didn't make you, God didn't make you, you're not an innocent victim who got plonked on this planet, you know, that you created the cause to be who you are, that everything you think and feel and say and do and experience is the fruit of what you have done. It empowers you, and so therefore loosens the grip of innocent victim me, which is ego grasping. So already that's implicit in the teaching of karma in junior school, first level, first module, first scope. Now, when you get to the next scope and you start to look into your mind where you become a Buddhist, this enables us to really start to loosen the grip. Again, the explicit teaching in the middle scope is to see the suffering of the delusions, the way they're so painful, how they're affliction of emotions. They're so painful. But the implicit teaching here gets us closer to understanding emptiness, dependent arising, is that these delusions have the function of being misconceptions. This is a hard one to see, but it's implicit there. You start to realize what a delusion is by definition is a misconception in the bones of your being that you have made up that exaggerates the status of something. That's the function of all the delusions. So here in the middle scope, we're discussing attachment and anger, or the branch delusions, not the root delusion yet. But already we begin to understand that, and that continues to loosen the grip and help us realize that attachment is a story my mind has made up, that there's no cake on that plate that exists divinely, deliciously, that hasn't depended upon my mind calling it that. Already that's implicit, even in the second scope. Now, when we get to the six perfections, we'll look explicitly at dependent arising, but already our minds are ready for this here. If you don't feel abused, where is the abuse? This is logic, but we don't like it. I always remember my mother, her best friend, my darling mother, her husband, my darling daddy, was a naughty daddy, a bit, like everybody's naughty. He was a bit naughty in many ways, a bit hopeless with money, and he liked his alcohol, and he was a bit naughty in other ways. I adore my father. I love my father. I forgive my father. And my mother adored my father. But she had her best friend, Sheila. They were both Catholics. Sheila was this working class lady, the other side of town, who had this horrible husband. Old Red, she adored, but Sheila was in love with God. And as far as she was concerned, everybody had God in them. And she loved everybody. She smoked 80 Marlboros a day. She was skinny as a rake, as we say in Australia. She lived on bread and butter, countless cups of hot tea, which is very Australian, and 80 Marlboros a day. She was hilariously funny. I adored visiting Sheila, because Sheila had 6 boys as well. So that probably was an attraction for me. I'd go hang out with Sheila, because Sheila she'd always praise my smile. I don't think anybody told me I had a nice smile before, but I adored Sheila because she loved my smile. So of course she had me by then, didn't she? She had me. So anyway, Sheila was my mother's best friend. And my father was also pretty naughty. He would bet on all the horses, and Reg, Sheila's husband, he was the one who organized all the betting. He did illegal betting on the horses. So they both wasted their wives' money. They didn't take care of their children properly. They drank too much alcohol. And Reg was like, so then they would sort of communicate with each other. And I just was wonderful. They both loved God, Sheila especially. What am I getting at? There's a particular reason. Oh yes, so Sheila. This is too much for the West. We don't like these stories. Sheila was hilariously funny, and Reg would come home. He was a taxi driver, and he'd come home dead drunk, and he would jump on Sheila at lunchtime, and Sheila would have her cigarette, smoking away while Reg did his thing. It was water off a duck's back for Sheila. She couldn't care less about this ridiculous boy. He was one of her 7 sons, you've got to know that there are people like this. She loved Reg. He was this ridiculous person. And he would jump on her at lunchtime. She was smoking a cigarette, while he was doing his thing. She couldn't care less. She loved Reg because God was in Reg. So now that's called rape, okay? Every day. She didn't feel raped. You've got to realize this. She didn't talk about emptiness. She was a Catholic, for God's sake. She didn't talk about bodhichitta. She was a Catholic. But we know people like this. It was water off a duck's back. She couldn't care less. She would joke about it while she was smoking her cigarettes, and come out for an extra cup of tea after. So where's the abuse if you don't feel abused? We know people are like this. but we don't like to hear it because we love to blame. We want to be angry. We want to find fault. Now, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because in some cases, people are terrible, are shocking, do abuse, do harm, brutalize people, and people who've got lots of attachment get brutalized and have suffered terribly. No one's denying suffering. All Buddha's saying is we can change our mind and therefore we won't suffer. That bodhisattva, whatever level bodhisattva, cutting off their hand and feeding it to a starving animal, for that person, that action is as inconsequential as a leaf falling off a tree. We've got to understand the logic of that based on bodhicitta and emptiness. So we can have courage and try to practice. But if we're not a suitable vessel, don't try to cut your hand off yet, please. It's too soon. Don't be ridiculous. And if your husband's raping you, kindly leave him. God Almighty. Okay, if you think God is in everybody and you love him like Sheila loved Reg, then cool. We are the boss of our lives, you know. I hope we're communicating. Sheila transformed problems every day. And why? How come? What was the consequence? She was a funny, hysterically wonderful, lovable, marvelous human being with her 80 Marlboros a day and her bread and butter and cups of tea. I'll never forget Sheila admiring my smile. She had me. And her sons were okay then anyway. So we understand these things, but this is rooted in compassion. She had compassion, and it's rooted in emptiness. Dependent arising. Things are what we call them. That's it. So this is what's crucial in this practice. But you've got to understand why you want to transform problems. Let's compare this. This is where we've got lots of people who are complete victims. I'm not being rude, it's just how we are. Completely nice people, kind people who don't shout, who don't get angry, but are in abusive relationships and who get abused daily and wonder why when they're being so nice, because they have attachment to being loved. This deep primordial craving in the bones of our being to be approved of. So this misconception of I'm a nice person. Please hit me again, No, please punch me on the other side. That's not what's being said here. That's a mentally ill person who's got enormous attachment and has no courage and doesn't know how to distinguish between compassion and understanding how to be wise and strong. So the compassion we're talking about here is compassion that's rooted in powerful wisdom. The compassion of a bodhisattva that we're trying to cultivate is powerful compassion. It's got iron in it. It's not weak like the victim mind. Person who gets, misused and abused. That's based on attachment and no understanding of their mind, That's not what we're discussing here. This is the only person, in other words, who can do this kind of practice is a person who hasn't got much attachment. And that's what we're aiming for, And who has some solid understanding of dependent arising. But things are how you label them. This is where we even understand the way the mind works. I mean, Lama Yeshe in Mahamudra talks about this. This is the way Buddhism describes how the mind works. Not even it's implying emptiness. That, the way everything, as Lama Zopa puts it, the way everything out there appears back to us. And as Lama Yeshe calls it, the mind functions as a mirror. This is quite fascinating. It needs thinking about. Our mind is like a mirror. It reflects things. This is already powerful. It reflects things. So what is out there is a reflection in our mind. The way things appear to us is dependent upon what's in the mirror of your mind. So if your mind is full of anger, the mirror is polluted by anger, it is clear how something will appear to you. If your mind is like Sheila, enormous love and compassion, everybody and everything appeared differently to Sheila through the mirror of her mind. But this is kind of intense to think that we don't actually cognize things directly. When we really study Lorig, the text about the mind, this is quite a subtle point. We don't actually, we've only got conceptuality and we have sensory consciousness. We're already sensory conscious, we talk about this, how it's completely deluded. We think, if I look at my latest boyfriend, I see, handsome Wolfgang, and I think, oh, how Wolfgang is so handsome. And I really think my eyes are seeing, this is just to do with the sensory consciousness, how we even get that wrong. My sensory consciousness, my eye consciousness can only cognize two things, shape and color. So you've got to ask, where does handsome divine Wolfgang come from? What part of my mind is cognizing that? Well, that's your mental consciousness. You've got sensory and you have mental. Sensory are like dumb animals. They're profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. We give them way too much power. So eye consciousness can cognize shape and color. And then the next millisecond, quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. And what's your mental consciousness at the moment at the grossest level? It's full of billions upon billions upon billions of conceptual stories, viewpoints, opinions that I have made up and have become programmed with from countless past lives. So through those lenses, depending on whether it's attachment in my mind, so masses of emotional hunger in my mind, which is the energy of attachment, hungrily looking for some divine boy out there, Wolfgang appears and somehow suits my picture of what I think my attachment needs. Instantaneously, I then label divine handsome Wolfgang. And then I believe the divine handsome Wolfgang is in the bones and the blood of Wolfgang. No, my mind has created a story solely based on what's in my mind. My mirror is reflecting exactly what's in my mirror. But I believe he exists out there like that. This is emptiness. This is dependent arising. And this is just explaining the Buddhist view of how the mind works. It's powerful. We just believe whatever we see. We believe whatever we see, and we have, and this is the part that's so shocking. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, this is so shocking, almost can't believe it. The vast majority of all humans on the planet, this is hard to believe, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. In other words, we totally buy into the external world. That is that, he is this, she is that, he is this, he did that, that is therefore this. And we're talking the delusions here. These misconceptions we made up that distort everything out there. The subtlest one, of course, is what we're implying here. The subtlest, most pervasive delusion is that things have an intrinsic nature. And even the virtues are caught up in that. So even if I have love and compassion for Wolfgang, which are the virtues, still it's I, self-existent me, having self-existent love for self-existent Wolfgang. The delusions are like liars at two levels, both ultimately and conventionally. At least love and compassion are valid conventionally. It's a good starting point. So even this, the way the mind works is really a marvelous way already to enable us to understand dependent arising and emptiness. So when we discuss in this text, let me get to the verse. I think verse 7 is where we can discuss this. Verse 7 is where we can discuss this one. Verse 7 of these 8 verses. Here we go. So in short, this is Tonglen, actually. But I'm going to skip over Tonglen for the minute. I'm going to go to verse 8. I'll go back to Tonglen. I'll go back to verse 7 in a minute. Let's go to verse 8, the final verse. This is what we're discussing here. Okay, verse 8. Here we go. Undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So this is the one, these so-called 8 worldly dharmas, 8 worldly concerns. I know when I first heard about it, and you're going to hear it out of the mouth of any Tibetan, when I first heard, I'm thinking, what are these people talking about? I was so bored by these so-called 8 worldly dharmas, you know? So this is what we're discussing here. It's 8 ways of dividing how attachment works at a much more primordial level, which is how we tend to talk about it anyway. So let's go into these 8 pairs of how attachment works. You see, attachment is the main voice of the root delusion. It's so linked to it, especially the 8th of these, which is this attachment to being seen as a good person. It's attachment to reputation, attachment to being liked. It's the closest to ego grasping. Like I always quote, the yogi up in the mountains who's given up all the grosser attachments, you know, family, friends, beloveds, mortgages, children, houses, objects of attachment. They've given up all of that, but they're still thinking about what the people down in the village are thinking about them. This is the closest to ego grasping. So attachment really, the more subtly we get into attachment, the more close to ego grasping, the root delusion, we will see that it is. They're so utterly integrated. So let's look at these so-called 8 worldly dharmas, you know. So it's attachment in 8 different ways. It's a more pervasive way of describing attachment. In the middle scope, when we talk about attachment, usually we talk about how it's this junkie, as it is, this junkie that only wants things that are good. And the millisecond it meets the bad thing, the attachment turns into aversion. Aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And aversion, as we know, is multifaceted. It can be the most volatile level is violent anger, screaming and yelling. Then the milder versions of aversion, irritated, annoyed, upset, frustrated. That's when attachment doesn't get what it wants. But a small example, like you stub your toe, the red light, the little baby events in a day that we never pay attention to, but which are perfect moments for practice, perfect moments to start transforming because they're called problems. Don't wait till your husband leaves you. Don't wait till you get abused. Don't wait till you're accused of murdering somebody before you try to transform a problem. Start with the baby events. So here, it's a different way of describing attachment being the pervasive delusion there all the time. So the first pair of these 8 is this constant assumption, this constant craving to only have happy feelings, which is another way of just talking about attachment. It's a constant hunger to only have happy feelings, pleasant feelings. Now, then the second we know that an unpleasant feeling arises, like, like I always think of one simple example I think of when, one center I'd go to in Australia, Atisha Center. It's in the bush, about 2 hours north of Melbourne, and it's very chilly in the winter. So you're in the Gompa and it's all warm and cozy. Then you get the tea break, and we all have 30 minutes off. And I open the Gompa door, and the cold wind attacks you. I mean, you'll know about all this in Zurich. We all know these experiences, but we don't analyze them. So the second I remember open the door, the warmth and the coziness in the Gompa is when attachment is getting what it wants. So you're kind of comfortable. But the second you open the door, the cold wind hits you. And then I can see my room. It's a 2.5-minute walk. So listen to this. The second the cold wind hits me, what has happened to my attachment? First of all, it was sitting complacently because it was getting the warmth. Now, all of a sudden, aversion is arising. But another way to put it is this: the attachment to the warmth now shifts and becomes attachment to being free of the cold, which means anticipating the warmth of my room 2.5 minutes away. So this is the first level of attachment, constantly wanting the nice feelings. And then the second the unpleasant one arises, the attachment shifts to now wanting to be free of the unpleasant feelings. And that includes constantly anticipating over that 2.5 minutes. And that's what makes you bear the 2.5 minutes of the cold. You're waiting for the warmth to come. This is how we spend our lives, and this is why we go crazy. So this is the point where you learn to not just put up with the cold, which really means waiting for the warmth to come in 2.5 minutes. This is very scary. But accepting the cold, not just accepting it and putting up with it, but greeting the cold. Not just that, calling it good. Most of us are kind of like this passive aggression of putting up with the problem, hoping and praying every second the problem will stop. And that's the terrible tension. Then all I have to do in that 2.5 minutes was think of homeless people. They did not have any warmth to look forward to. I think of the people in prison who have no comfort to look forward to. That's powerful. So transforming the problem means not even just putting up with that problem of the cold wind, waiting for the warmth to come, but actually enjoying the cold, calling it something different, analyzing the sensations, analyzing the thoughts, analyzing the experience of it. Not just waiting for the warmth to come in 2.5 minutes, because that's attachment. This is powerful. This is transforming problems. Because fact is, when you think about friends in prison who have nothing to look forward to, when you think of the homeless people who don't have any warmth to look forward to, then you can hear the suffering, you know. This is the first pair, merely wanting only happy feelings and then wanting to be free of the unhappy feelings. So it's constantly attachment, in other words, constantly attachment. This is second by second, grabbing our mind. This is what happens all the time automatically. The moment you feel the cold, we shiver, we get angry, we don't like the cold. Oh no, so cold, we get angry, upset. We wonder why we suffer. This is why we suffer, these states of mind. This is called transforming problems. Start with the small events. But it means understanding attachment. These 8 bodhidharmas are attachment at the most subtle level. These assumptions in our mind. It's huge. We hear it, every one of us. So think about this. You know, at the moment, it's got nothing. This is, you think, what's this got to do with compassion? This is just me dealing with problems. But what do you think? When you can deal with a problem, you can call it something different. You are becoming more powerful. You are becoming more courageous. You are becoming, therefore, more compassionate. And so the consequence is you are able to now benefit others better. You're the direct beneficiary of this practice. Don't deny that. But you're turning yourself into this marvelous person who then can benefit others, including the pedophiles and the junkies and the ones who harm you and the ex-wife who cheats on you. They're the bigger ones. You're training for those. This is second by second. Because attachment's pervasive. It drives every second of every sentient being's lives. The next pair mightn't be so relevant to some of us. I don't know, it seems like maybe not, but it's constantly attached to getting things, having things, being given things, receiving things, getting things. And then constant attachment to not get, to being free of not getting things. The same idea, you know. So that could be huge for some of us, less for others. But the next two are really intense. I mean, they're all intense. This next one, these next two seem similar, but you listen to them, they're different. This next one is this constant craving to hear nice words with my name in them. It's called praise. Okay. And then the moment you hear even a slight indication of words with your name in it that are criticism, total mental collapse, isn't it? The pain of being criticized is unbearable. So the constant hunger to hear nice words with your name in them, called praise, and the constant hunger to be free of hearing criticism. Because when we live among people, this is constant, you know, so clear. This is like immediate. It's like immediate sounds, words now, or reading them in a, you know, reading them somewhere, like in an email or whatever. And this fourth slot, this fourth pair, the most pervasive, more primordial, but seems like the first lot, the third lot, but is not. And this is the one of attachment to reputation. Constant, and we have to analyze it, look at the most simple way. Sounds like very grand, saying you're attached to reputation. Oh, I don't have that. I don't mind what people think about me. No, it's just not true. Think about the universe. Here we are, we're intensely social beings, aren't we? Sentient beings live in relation to each other. We get born in somebody else's body, you know, it's just the method we use. We've got, from the second we're conceived, we rely upon other people. We've got mummies and daddies and then siblings and aunties and uncles and grandmas and grandpas and the ants and the rats and the cockroaches and all the cats and the dogs who live in the house. Sentient beings everywhere, sentient beings, isn't it? Sentient beings. And this is relating very much to this, to the karma called experiences similar to the cause, which includes the praise one, which includes all the others actually. From the time we're born, from the time we're conceived, this is in the mind, automatically, as a tiny baby, already, because of ego grasping, because of a sense of a separate self, depending on how strong the karma is, you know. Then even the way your mother responds to you. I say your mummy smiles at you, your little baby. Your mummy smiles at you. Already you're craving in there, which you brought with you, this attachment to being seen as a nice girl, being praised with a smile is approval, isn't it? I mean, this is not talking about the valid way to be a nice mother, the valid way to be with each other, to give love and compassion. We're not discussing that. We're discussing the neurotic, craven, desperate, hunger, attachment to be seen, to be validated, to be liked, as simple as that. We crave to be liked. So you've got to ask the question, why? Why do we need to be liked? This is telling us the depth of the suffering of ego grasping and attachment, that because you're nobody and you're nothing. We don't think we are anything until we are approved of by others. That's how desperate ego is. That's how frantically schizophrenic we are. That's how, if you like, dualistic. The stronger the ego grasping, the stronger the attachment to being seen as a good girl, the stronger the suffering. Because like you don't exist until other people praise you. Other people not praise, like you, approve of you. So this is running in our mind all the time. And when we're really suffering in this way, and most sentient beings are, but it's the hardest to see, it's underpinning every decision we make. That's why we become total cowards. We can never express what we really feel. We don't really do what we really want, because we're always watching how people will respond to us. And if they respond approvingly, then we will do it. If they respond disapprovingly, then we won't do it. We won't think it. We won't say it, because we're frantic to be seen and heard and seen as a good girl. And in other words, we have zero confidence in our own validity. This is how sick we are. This is how mentally ill we are. And this is so pervasive, it's the hardest attachment to see. It takes a while to see this. It's just there all the time. Look into our mind. We're always having conversations with people. We're always telling people what we think. We're needing people to hear us. Some of the worst pain we have in our lives, which causes incredible suffering. There's no question about it. Because we haven't been approved of or seen or heard since we're tiny children, because our mummies and daddies were completely neurotic. So we're living in total, utter suffering. And it's because we've got this attachment. It's because we've got this attachment. And then you get born due to karma to mummies and daddies who are also neurotic, and each of them this is what, look at mummies and daddies in relationships, like a nightmare. Your mummy wants your daddy's approval because she doesn't think she's anybody until he loves her. And he doesn't, and then she doesn't trust it when he does love her. Oh, you don't love me enough. And he says it 47 times. No, you still don't love me enough. And he says the same, like we're two insane people desperately craving to get the other person's approval. But even when we get it, we don't believe it, because this is how sick and suffering our poor mind is. This is called attachment to reputation. And it's the deepest one, the hardest to go. The yogi in the mountains giving up everything, still thinking about what the people are thinking about him, wanting to be validated. This shows how mental illness is. This is attachment, people. What do you think loneliness is? I don't have someone to talk to. What do you mean talk to? You mean to share your thoughts with? What is it about your thoughts that make them so hopeless and worth nothing unless someone else hears them? If that's not schizophrenic, I don't know what is. Please hear me. We're all like it. This is the suffering of samsara. That's what Buddha means by samsara. We don't think we are valid. We don't think our thoughts are valid. We don't think our life is valid until someone smiles at us. And that other person is thinking they're not valid either until you smile at them. So these two mentally ill people propping each other up. No wonder we go crazy in relationships. Mother of God. This is called samsara, people. Buddha calls it samsara. Attachment to being liked, to being approved of. Because why do you need someone else to approve you? Because you can't do it yourself. So that's what I love that saying in the West, become your own person. Learn to validate yourself. That's when you become liberated. Then you're much more connected to others, but you're not craven for everything they say and think and do. You've got some courage now. You are your own person. And then that's why everybody adores you, because you know you follow your own light now. And you're living in perfect ethics, and you have the courage to do what needs to be done. It's the deepest one to go. The deepest. Don't think you've given it up until you practically realize emptiness, people. The yogi in the mountain has still got it. It's the longest, it's the subtlest attachment. And we'll only notice it when we start to see our minds at an ever deeper level, ever deeper level, ever deeper level. You know? That's why it says in verse 8. That's why it says, undefiled by these neurotic states of mind, my words, undefiled by these constant cravings for nice feelings and craving to be free of unnice feelings, craving to get nice things, craving to be free of not getting nice things, craving to hear praise and craving to be free of hearing criticism, and craving to be validated and then to be free of not being validated, undefiled by the stains of these superstitions. May I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. Not saying emptiness even, it shows how close it is. But this is, every time you can do this, you're smashing attachment and you're smashing ego grasping, you're undermining the root delusion. This is the most courageous person. This is the courage of the bodhisattvas. Add compassion to this, then you are an amazing being, utterly authentic, driven by ethics, totally free. Once you've got emptiness and bodhicitta, you know, not totally yet until you become Buddha, but so radical. I wonder if you have any questions, please. Any questions there? Who's the boss? Who's it, Nina or Jeff?
I'm here, Venerable. Hi.
Oh, good. Okay, here we go. Here's Katarina. Go talk to me, Katarina.
Hello, Venerable. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right. I'm trying to get it into words, what I'm thinking.
Oh.
You were just saying about the last most pervasive attachment, wanting to be seen as like a good person, being validated.
Yes. Yes.
So it's something that holds me in a relationship, which is unhealthy, would then be like relating to the 6th verse. Would it be crushing my own delusions then if I left this relationship, or would it mean like the 6th verse? Would that mean I have to or should stay in the relationship?
I understand your point exactly, Katarina. This is where we have to make choices, you know. So there's Sheila, my mother's friend. It never occurred to her as an option in her particular mind, with her particular style, her faith in God, her practice, her life, her karmic connections with these people. There's many factors. It never occurred to her to leave this abusive relationship, because she was able to utterly transform it, and she was a joyful, happy human being. So everything is related to where we're at, the karma between us, what the practice we most need. One other person absolutely must leave that husband immediately. So you have to know where you're at in yourself and what you need and what your practice is. That's the only way to answer it. Do you understand me, Katarina?
Yeah.
So normally what causes most people in terrible relationships not to leave them is not valid at all. First of all, in our culture, I think, in our Christian culture, it's especially maybe all the Christian one, it's seen as heavy duty to give up on a relationship. You've got to stick to that relationship until you die. I mean, look at the traditional Catholic one. You were married until you died. You know, divorce was impossible. It was a sin. So there's this very strong culture in our Christian culture for hundreds of years that leaving a relationship like a partner is somehow wrong. So then the passivity that people live in and the utter despair and the rage and the passive aggression of living together, even in the same bed with zero awareness and an utter living in a nightmare. I mean, it's like monstrous. It's like awful. So to get some awareness, and this is the key point, you know, if you're starting to practice, the bottom line of both of there's two options really when it comes down to being really brutal, whether it's your job, could be with your boss, with your sister, or with your beloved. It's the same principle. You've got two choices, basically, Katarina. One is to stay and make it your practice, and one is to go. Both are practice, but the key point in both is that you choose it. This is the nightmare. Mostly, that's why my friends in prison are such good examples. They don't have the luxury of leaving the prison, so they know they don't have the choice to do that, but they choose to change their mind. Do you see my point here? They choose it, and that's where the happiness comes from. So whatever you do, you stay or you go, both, it's your choice. And once you choose it, you are powerful. That's the key point. But most of the time, oh, you know, Robina, you can't stand your job. Why don't you leave it? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'll never get another job. Well, you could change your mind and start to see it as good. No, I can't do that. It's a terrible job. So we don't choose anything. We just become nightmarish and go crazy in our relationships and our jobs and our lives because we don't have any awareness and we're too scared of doing the wrong thing, of having people disapprove of us, etc., etc. You understand, Katarina?
Yes, I do.
To have the wish to do what's most beneficial. And it might be you go tomorrow, baby. Or it might be the karma, and you've got to have some kind of wisdom to know what is the right thing. And this is not so easy.
Yeah.
But it only comes with practice.
Yeah.
And not to be a martyr, not to be a martyr. It is not being a martyr. It's the opposite. Sheila was not a martyr. You understand? It was her. So there's many things involved. Maybe the relationship really is over. What's the point of just standing there? It's ridiculous. Get the hell out, you know?
Yeah, it is over. It's
okay.
I can say that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out how does this then how is it different from the middle scope where I'm looking at my mind and trying to figure out. So we're talking about the great scope now, aren't we?
Yeah. Yes.
And
but you have to know, even though we're talking, this is a wisdom. No, this is not even compassion. This is a wisdom one. This is a middle scope. What is the right thing for you at this time? Is this a situation? The wisdom wing is all about you getting the right conditions for you to grow your mind. This is what we're almost scared of thinking in the West because it sounds selfish to us. We've got to understand the wisdom wing. You're the beneficiary. So if this relationship is stultifying and you're not growing and you're not seeing your mind properly and you're not doing what you need to, get the hell out. It's the wisdom is for your benefit, to help you get the conditions that enable you to practice, to do what's best. It might be the right place to be, to work on your detachment, your humility, and your compassion. It might be, but you've got to know that, what's right.
Okay.
You get my point? The compassion, and also it helps you become more compassionate. But we're so scared of it, especially when it comes to relationships. Oh, one of the commonest ones is, well, oh no, I didn't want to upset. But it's a lie. We just don't want them to dislike us. We don't want people to criticize us. We don't want the family to criticize. So in some cultures, it's still really strong. Like in India, you know, for say, an Indian culture. I remember discussing with an Indian woman in Delhi, a very devoted practitioner living in this particular relationship with a mother. And I sort of naively suggested she could leave. It was like telling her that she could kill somebody. It was so shocking because you just don't do that. So we've got to see how strongly bound we are by culture as well as our own, which is all fears inside. So we've got to know what is the right thing. I mean, it can really be selfish. I know in my life, my sisters, there are 7 of us, and I could see I admired my sisters. They thought about my mother. They didn't do things to upset my mother. I was like really selfish. When my next particular bit of life came along, I just went. My mother crying behind me. I looked really selfish, but I can look back now and see I had some wisdom. Even though it was looking selfish, I did exactly what I had to do, and it led me to where I am now. So in the end, it was a good thing to do. I didn't think it was courage. I just thought I was just doing what I wanted to do. You know, my poor mother crying behind me. Are you with me? Where
Yes,
are you?
Yes.
So honey, just make an aspiration to do what's most beneficial, and imagine everybody hating you. It's okay. Don't worry about it. You're still a good girl, Katerina, whether they think you are or not.
Yes, I've figured that out by now.
Good. I'm so happy. Well done.
Yeah, it took me that relationship. And
There you go.
and again, concerning that the verses that we're talking about now,
This is related. This is a very specific level of practice. This is really specific level of practice where the person who has, you are leaving. Oh no, whatever. It's your response to the bad. This is very specifically a direct response to the bad things happening. To when attachment doesn't get what you're criticized, you're abused, you're insulted. Someone doesn't like you. Someone doesn't praise you. Someone doesn't give you something. It doesn't mean you don't leave. It's not that. It's moment by moment, full on, intense moment by moment dealing. I mean, for you to give the victory to others at work when someone's criticized you doesn't mean you still don't leave the job. You don't sit there like a martyr, hit me again. Not like that. It's not like that. It's not meaning that, it's too concrete. I mean, accepting the abusive relationship all these years, let's say, and you really see this person as your guru because they've given you the opportunity to see your mind, doesn't mean you still don't leave them. That's not the point here. It's not sitting there like a martyr waiting to be hit again. That's not what's implied at all. You've got to practice. You've got to find the right conditions to develop your wisdom. That's the wisdom wing. You've got to find the right situation to develop your wisdom. It might be just live there with your cranky old mother until the day you die, serving your old demented mother's needs, which many people think of the worst part of their life, like their life is wasted. But a person who's got this view, and it's the karma they have to repay the kindness of that mother, this poor old neurotic, angry mother abusing you every day, it might be the perfect practice. You've got to know what it is, where you're at and what work you have to do internally. Then you'll know which external condition is the right one for you. Katerina, all of us. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What else, people? This is really tasty. What else?
Hey, Stina, your question was answered.
Good, darling. Talk to me, Stina.
Well, actually, I took my hand down because my question, I'll ask it anyway now.
Good, you do ask it, yes.
It's more about karma than about the 8 verses. I'm thinking about Sheila's husband. I mean, with her response to I still call it abuse.
That's right. Yeah, from his side, no, stop, Stina. From his side, it was true, totally self-centered, totally abusive, totally angry. That's not denied, Stina. There are two things. I know, but just finishing before you go on. One is Sheila and her mind and how she interprets and her own internal practice. And then one is Reg and his mind and what he's doing and the negative karma he's creating. There are two things. One does not deny the other. So given that, please continue. It's a really important point.
Since less harm is being done due to Sheila's, there's less harm created because Sheila does not feel harmed. Does this affect the negative karma that the husband is creating?
Oh, absolutely. Of course it does. Immediately. If she loves Reg and gives him a big hug after he's raped her, then of course it mitigates it for him. And of course it is. Of course, it's very powerful. Yes. If someone steals from you and you in your mind give it to them, it shifts the karma for sure. Yes. Okay.
I didn't realize that. That's
no, it's an interesting point. No, it has an effect. There's no question about that. Because I mean, the moment she kisses him and loves him, oh, I love you, Reg. Straight away that calms his mind down. It lessens his aggression. Whereas if she screamed at him and punched him in the nose, but on the other hand, that might be what's appropriate sometimes. I mean, when I got held up with a gun by a guy in New York, I shouted at him. I didn't say, oh, here's my money. No, I didn't. I abused him and shouted at him, and he walked away with his tail between his legs. So it depends on the situation. But I wasn't angry with him. I really could see he suffered more than me. It was a very curious situation. Do you understand my point?
I do.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Linda.
Thank you, Venerable
Okay.
Robina. As I try to start to develop some wisdom, would
Good on you.
one,
Try to start with them. Well done.
all
Linda.
right, I'm starting to develop some wisdom. Would one indicator, I mean, I have a difficult situation and I notice that I cannot at this point keep my mind from being very unsettled and disturbed. Is that an indication that it's just too much and try something smaller?
Yeah, sorry. So you meaning to be in the presence of this particular person is too much for you? Honey child, you've got to know what you can handle. You have, that's what wisdom is, Linda. You've got to be wise. So if you can't, let's say you can't cope with your crazy mum. I mean, I'm not, you know, mum's always a crazy example. If you really cannot be around your crazy mother, you blame your mother. No, it's you can't handle it. You're not ready enough. Then even if she hates, even if she gets mad at you, you've got to know what you can and can't handle. That's unbelievable. But don't lie to yourself, you know. And don't just be passive aggressive and don't just avoid, but you know you can't handle it. This is incredibly important point. Of course it is, Linda. But have this thought, knowing that she's suffering, but you can't handle that suffering right now, but aiming to be able to one day. It's like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, not my mom, but close. And
I know, but
I can,
matter, whatever it is.
I can tell when my mind is not calm at the, I can notice that. So maybe that's a gauge. Thank you.
It's a good gauge, but also it doesn't mean you still can't try. It doesn't mean you still can't work with it. You have to know, this is where there's no other solution but to first know the theory and then to do the practice. And this just takes time. You can't, like if you given Roger Federer to play tennis with and you've only done one day of tennis, give up on it. Don't even pretend you can do something, but you've got to know where you're at and then learn from it. This is what wisdom is. It's the same with Katarina's point. You've got to know where you're at and what you can handle. Sheila didn't even consider an option because that's where she was at, you know. She really and truly, you understand?
Yes, thank you.
Good, darling. Good, Linda. But of course, what holds us back so often is our fear of being criticized, our fear of being seen as bad, especially when it's family. It's so intense, you know. This is the one, so we have to have courage to do this. Yes, Jivra. Talk to me.
Hello.
Hello.
So my question is, just a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned that another person's behavior towards you is bad. And if you, depending on what your reaction is, like, for example, if you scream versus if you go and hug the person or behave nicely versus not behave nicely to give back to that person. So does that change your karma or that other person's karma or the karma between your?
It's very interdependent, Jivrab. It's really important. So I mean, my simple example, I use that example of being held up with a gun. It happened to be, I mean, I'm not such a holy person, but it turned out to be, there's this young guy in New York years ago. And I mean, you know, he wanted my money. At first there was fear in my mind. And then actually I realized instinctively he was more afraid than me. And I almost had affection for this boy. I remember feeling kind of, and I became like his mother. So I shouted at him and yelled at him. I even said, you give me your money, I'm just as poor as you. So I was shouting at him, which looked, if you saw from a distance, you'd see this awful girl shouting at this poor boy if you hadn't seen the gun. I looked like I was the aggressor, but I really know it wasn't coming from aggression. And it turned out to work. He just walked away, you know. It was a very curious situation. So that's an example. So, you know, let's say somebody who abuses you, it's completely appropriate to respond strongly, to subdue that person. But the key point is it has to come from some compassion, not out of anger. If it's just out of anger, it's just more drama. And of course, that's difficult. Are you hearing my point, Jivrab?
Yes. So how does that shift the karma and whose karma gets shifted?
Whatever's in your mind determines the karma you create. So if someone harms you, like that guy with the gun, give this simple example. I'm not trying to make me like I'm special. It just happened. It was an unusual experience. I mustn't, in the end, I don't think he must have created much negative karma because I think he learned something from it. And I remember I had affection for this person and I told him off. So we made a karmic connection. He didn't harm me in the end. He didn't shoot me and I wasn't angry and I didn't give him his money. So he learned something and I learned something. There was something dynamic about it. rather than me being completely full of shaking and fear, giving him my money, and then him being arrogant. Would have been a very different dynamic. You understand my point?
Okay, yes. So I just wanted to give an example of, let's say your husband
that.
is shouting at you, okay, and you want to react. So
Is it
if
now,
you
first of all,
have
before you go
compassion-
further, Jivra, before you go further, is it close family or a stranger on the
yes,
street?
I said husband. Husband is
Okay, good.
screaming
Okay,
at
darling,
you,
husband's shouting at you. Then?
and then you want to react, obviously. So you can't decide between whether you should keep shut or get
Okay, so
angry
my
and
thinking is,
respond.
I understand, Jivrav. So my sense is this has got very much to do with the pattern of your relationship. If for 30 years
Oh.
you've sat there like a little mouse and allowed him to abuse you, maybe it's time for you to stand up for yourself and say, I do not want this abuse anymore. But it's got to come from some strength inside you, not just anger. Maybe that's what you should choose to do. It depends on your history with each other. Are you seeing my point?
Okay. So
But, you know,
saying that firmly will not ruin my karma any further.
Not, what do you mean by ruin, darling? Don't talk like that. It's too dramatic.
Like, for example, saying that, okay, I'm not going to take this anymore and you need to now
But it's got to come
mind
from
your
some,
language.
it's got to come not just from anger. It's got to come
Okay.
not just from anger in you, Jivrab. It's got to be coming from you wanting to get more courage, you wanting to have more strength, you having the wisdom to do what is right for you to become a better human being, and then maybe some compassion for him as well. Not just
Okay.
fear and being like a little mouse and then getting angry. That's what happens. Some wife for 30 years has been quiet and then she stabs her husband 37 times. That's because she suppressed her anger for 37 years. That's not useful. Are we communicating?
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yes.
All right, darling. Good. What else, people? Any other questions? This is a good topic. All of this demands inner awareness. This is the whole thing. Yes, Wolfgang. Ugly Wolfgang, handsome Wolfgang. It doesn't matter which one.
Venerable Robina, do you know that
Yeah.
I'm happily married?
That's right. I will leave you alone.
And my second question is, I gave up one of my top favorite attachments. And I really gave it
You
up.
mean an object? You mean an object?
Yeah, in an object.
Okay.
For 2 years. I didn't engage. For 2 years.
Okay,
Nothing.
okay.
Zero
I
engagement.
understand.
And so, but I cannot feel any real difference. So I have pretty much the
You
same
cannot see
life.
what? I'm sorry,
Any
Wolfgang. You can't
difference.
see, what?
I cannot see any difference in my life.
You can't see any advantage to yourself. You
Yeah.
can't see any change in your own mind.
It's pretty much the same life, but without the peaks of pleasure from engaging.
Okay, so this is a good question. Okay. Let me use it as usual. Let me use an analogy. You've got a hectare of ground and it's a mess and you start to work on it. So now, even when you start to work on it tomorrow, the result might even be that the ground will look even worse. You've dug up the dirt, it looks even worse than it did yesterday, but it's not the same because you are beginning the process of working on it. And eventually you'll grow this, you'll put the seeds in the ground. And even then it doesn't look any different, but you know you've put the seeds in and the results will come eventually. The same with your mind. You feel the same right now. Looks like nothing is different. But if for 2 years you've really worked on giving up attachment, you have sown stupendously powerful seeds in your mind that will only ripen as your happiness and good results for you in the future. Are we communicating? But we want results now. That's our problem. So in other words, how things look now is not the criterion of success, Wolfgang. In fact, it could even cause you more suffering. You might be feeling more agitated, but that doesn't mean you're not sowing powerful, virtuous seeds. Because we forget that everything we think and do, say now, sow seeds in the mind that will produce future results way into the future. So even if you're miserable every day and you're doing your gardening, if you're unhappy every day, but you're sowing seeds and pulling out weeds, they will bring results in the future. So we have to have patience and humility. That's the answer.
Okay, thank you.
That's satisfying. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the Christian promise of the heaven in the next life.
Well, okay, you can say that if you like, but it's the same as your garden. I just gave the garden example. I didn't use the other one. Your garden is the same, Wolfgang. Don't make it religious in that way. That's sarcastic. Don't do that. You know damn well that you're going to take several years for your garden to really manifest those beautiful seeds. Surely that is a better example for your mind. And you know that's scientifically true. Don't hear it like the other one. It's just punishment and reward. It's like that, yes, but hear the logic of it. In your garden, it's true. Your garden can look terrible for 5 years, but you know what you're doing. You're pulling out the weeds every day and you're sowing the seeds. That's why I'd rather have that example than the other one.
Yeah.
Hear my point?
Yeah.
Karma's, it's better to use that example because
Yeah.
the other one is just punishment and reward.
Yeah.
And being a
I think
martyr.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
disgusting.
because with the garden, or if you're going to the gym, after 2 years, you will see an effect. If
Then
you go
you'll
to
see
the
the
gym,
result.
After
That's
2
right.
years, you should see an effect.
Exactly. And
Otherwise,
we have to,
something is wrong.
that's right, Wolfgang, but we have to see, we have to know that karma, we have to know it's a slow process. That's all. But attachment wants results immediately.
Not immediately, but after 2 years, because otherwise maybe you're on the wrong track. Maybe you're doing something wrong.
But no, but you have no, this is where you have no, but listen, no, Wolfgang, you're still being impatient. You're still demanding proof. I'm talking about way into the future. I'm not talking about how you feel now. I mean, I'm not so sure, but maybe also I'm not so sure, knowing your mind a little bit, that you're not being a bit brutal to yourself.
No,
I'm not
it's
so
not
sure.
brutal. But if I'm learning another language, French, and after 2 years, I cannot say a word in French, something is wrong.
Okay, so then it depends how long it takes to learn French. If you expect an oak tree to grow after 1 year, your mistake is not the oak tree hasn't come. The mistake is you've got false expectation. So maybe you understand, if you like the Buddha's teachings and you understand about karma, maybe you've got to learn more about the way karma works, and then you'll have a more realistic expectations. Perhaps that's the answer to.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's valid. That's why I'm asking. What is
Yes.
the time range?
Yeah, I understand. I mean, there can also be, yeah, okay, then I think you just have to, okay, so what would be the result that you would thought should be there that isn't there? You mean to feel better, to feel happier? Is that what you're suggesting the result should be? Is that what you're suggesting? That you'd be satisfied if that happened, that you'd feel better or less attached?
According to the teaching, if you give up attachment, you will receive relaxing happiness, joy.
Oh, okay. So if you're talking about two things here, you're talking about the object, and you're describing giving up an object, an action. You're giving up an action, but that's not the same as giving up attachment. Is this attachment still in the mind? Is the thoughts are still there, wanting that object, wanting to do that action?
Of course, at the beginning, it's very strong, and then it weakens. So it's not yet zero. So
But therefore, that is the
from-
result. Already you are seeing results then.
It's from 100 to 10.
Well, that's results. What more do you want? Be satisfied. Like if you give up alcohol, you at least don't get drunk every day. Maybe your mind is still wanting a drink of alcohol, but the fact that you don't follow it means you are programming your mind in a new direction. Be more satisfied with you're so brutal with yourself, Wolfgang.
No,
Be
I'm
more
not brutal,
humble. You've got to be more humble and more recognizing that there is progress in your mind. There is progress. You just said it got less. That is a sign of progress. So that is exactly what you should be satisfied with. And the fact that you're long term by not following, let's just use the example of alcohol. I've no idea what the action is. It doesn't matter. But every day you don't have alcohol, you are by definition weakening the tendency to want alcohol. It still might be in your mind. So then it's a logical process. So maybe be a bit more nuanced in seeing the results. May I suggest? Wolfgang, are we communicating?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Who else? Nearly time to go. So maybe we'll do the last verse. The last verse is really emptiness, which illusory. No, that's the seventh verse. Sorry, the seventh verse is really about emptiness, seeing everything as illusory. Wait, and where is it? Now here it is. Here it says that. Oh yeah, illusory. So the seventh verse is the one I missed. So the seventh verse is that's where Tong Len is. So let me just use that. Just finish with that because we're implying this. Verse 7. Okay. In short, both directly and indirectly, I will offer every benefit and happiness, or my benefit, my merit, my happiness to all my mothers. And then may I secretly take upon myself all their harmful actions and suffering. This is the source of the Tonglen practice. Tonglen means giving, taking. And it's a seemingly simple, technically simple practice that can be done in meditation, and which I find many Western people really love, but it's pretty an outrageous practice. That basically you sit down, you visualize somebody with a headache. Simple, keep it simple. Could be your beloved, could be your baby. And eventually you can practice it being your enemy as you develop. And then when you breathe and you use your breath and you breathe in, you breathe in first, you breathe in, you imagine breathing into you. This is the answering the person's question from last, oh, that was the Moscow Center, because we're doing the same text. Okay, that's not the Moscow Center. Okay. So yeah, this person's question was this. She said, when you try to take upon yourself some person's suffering, do you get suffering, or is it just, what'd she say? Is it just like symbolic? And I said, it's neither. And we weren't ready for that answer then in Moscow, but we're ready for it here. So what we're doing here is we're imagining breathing in upon yourself like yucky smoke. You breathe in their headache, and you imagine, if you like, there's many ways you can do it. One way is you visualize like a little rock at your heart, and it's your self-cherishing. And I haven't even begun to use that concept yet. And we absolutely have to do that, but we'll have to do that next week. And you imagine it smashes it, and you breathe in, and then you breathe out blissful white light, and you breathe out your happiness, your good qualities, your good health. So what are we trying to do here? I think there are many misconceptions about this practice, and that's why that person's question. First of all, you are not trying to get suffering. That is beyond ridiculous. The second thing, which is really crucial to understand, this is not a healing technique. You're not trying to heal the other person's headache. There are plenty of healing techniques. You can use medicine Buddha. You can do lots of practices. But this is a thing that, again, is curious for us. We don't understand it. This is a practice for you and you alone. And you are merely using this person outside you with a headache as an example, as a reference point. And what you're doing is you're attempting that if you could, you would be happy to have this headache rather than them. So it's making you courageous and strong and powerful. It's you cultivating your compassion. So basically compassion is, may you not suffer. You see a person with a headache and you think, oh my God, look at that suffering. And you wish they didn't suffer. That's compassion. But then the next level of compassion, which is unique to the Bodhisattva path, is what can I do to take it away? That's when you proactively do something for the person. So you give them a pill or something. But this practice is neither of those. It's you trying to, again, smash ego grasping, specifically smash this instinct to put me first. You're trying to counteract that by thinking, if I could, I would rather have the headache than you. So it's not to heal their headache. It's not to heal their headache. This is not the point. It's you using them and their headache for you to cultivate compassion and to cultivate the brave attitude, even of imagining them being free of the headache. And you know what? I can handle it. Give it to me. Parents say that about their children. I would rather have the suffering than the child. That's what Tonglen is. So it's you becoming brave and strong and bringing your compassion to another whole level. You could do this walking down the street. You know, you could see a person with a broken leg walking down the street. You could think, I would rather have the broken leg and I would rather them be able to walk down the street happily. Just that thought is like putting atomic bombs under your self-centeredness, your self-cherishing. This is the point of this practice. You know, It's very specifically, it's a practice for you to grow to next levels of compassion. That if I could, I would rather have that headache. I would rather have the broken leg than them. And then you're thinking, even as you're breathing in the headache, you're imagining, and you won't get a headache, I promise. You know, it'll make you even more powerful, even more healthy. There's no fear. It's like bizarre to think you get a headache. It's ridiculous. And even as you're breathing in the headache, imagining I'd rather have it, you think how happy you are that they're free of a headache. Because that's the purpose of doing it. Not, oh, I'm getting a headache. Oh, I'm getting a headache. Oh, poor me. That's ridiculous. You're happily, give it to me. I can handle it. No worries. I can handle a headache. Here, you go away free of a headache. That's the attitude. It's a very courageous attitude you're trying to cultivate. Then when you breathe out, you give them your good health. You see them becoming healthy and happy, and you're so glad to do that. Tonglen's outrageous practice. It smashes, it puts atomic bombs under ego grasping, under self-cherishing, under attachment. It's this culmination of these verses, you know, it's extraordinary. Any questions about that before we finish? We can continue next week in our last class.
Judd.
Hi, Venerable. I just wanted to ask, can Tonglen be practiced thinking of mental afflictions and attachment and mental suffering as well?
All of this, yes, as it says here, you know, I mean, I will take upon myself their harmful actions and their suffering. Of course, you won't become attached. You won't become crazy. You won't become sick. It's rather that you would rather have it, so to smash your delusions and they be free of it. That's the real point. The emphasis is on them being free of it. And, you know, give it to me, I can handle it. And if you're doing it properly, this is totally related to emptiness. And it's completely a courageous attitude you're trying to cultivate that makes you even more powerful, even more strong, and genuinely makes that paradigm shift when you eventually get bodhichitta, when rather re than them, you know. It's a huge practice. It's amazing. People spend years doing this retreat on all the realms of existence, of all the enemies, all the crazies, all the hell beings, everything. You know, it's an incredible practice. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. What else? And that's it, I think. The next week we'll go in further. We'll talk more about emptiness, and we'll talk about, spend more time on this, which I should have done in the beginning, this attitude that they call self-cherishing, which is the emphasis in this part of the path. We'll discuss that then. But I think, I mean, maybe I'm misinterpreting Wolfgang. Maybe he's really not seeing any results. But I think I want to say, and this might not refer to Wolfgang, that's up to him to decide. First of all, there is the understanding of the long-term benefits. And yes, you could put that Christian take on it, which sort of sounds like a bit depressing, but that's up to how people think. But the example of the things take time. And I think, you know, I think we can be, and I say the word brutal, we can be brutal with ourselves, but the real one is somehow that whatever we do, I mean, he's right. I mean, I don't know what his action is, Wolfgang, and I don't know what results he is expecting, but already he did answer that there is some result, like the alcohol example, there's less craving. This is the result, and that is logical in itself, you know. But many people who are alcoholics, they say they always think every day, I'm an alcoholic. You don't kind of fool yourself, oh, now I've given it up, you know, because some attachments are very strong. And this is the other one, Wolfgang, by the way, this is the other one. Okay. There's I have to say this now, different levels of practice. One level of practice is stopping following the thoughts, stop doing the action. So I've got this friend on death row, I mention this often, a Buddhist, Mitchell, and he tells me about one of the other guys whom I know. And he says, Mitchell said, Rabina, he thinks of torture all the time. Now think of a person who's got a very strong habit. Some people, you know, want to jump on 22 girls every day. Some people want to do video games 6 hours a day. Some people, we all want to eat food all the time. In other words, these attachments for sensory objects, forget about the attachment to being approved of, which are more subtle, but the sensory objects are quite strong. And imagine waking up in this life with a tendency to want to torture people. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine wanting to jump on little girls all day? It shows a powerful tendency in the mind. So in the sense that those habits could be very strong for us. So the very first level of practice, and for this friend on death row, I'm not glad he's on death row, but I'm glad he's in a situation where his friends understand him and he can't get away with torturing anybody. So at least even though his mind is doing it and he still can't stop it, and probably he doesn't really think about his mind, but if we can understand our mind and see we've got this tendency to jump on girls all day, or eat food all day, or watch video games all day, it is a struggle. And even when you stop watching the video games, or you stop wanting to jump, you stop jumping on 22 girls a day, the habit in the mind is still strong. So it really does take time for the habit to go away. Don't expect it. I mean, food is the strongest one for most of us. I've got so much attachment to food, I can't believe it. But I control it. I don't follow it every time. That's the practice. That's the practice. You're conscious of it. So I don't go jump on the food every time I think it, whereas once I might have. So then you're weakening the tendency, but don't expect that tendency to go away in this life. Next life, you'll wake up with no thought to jump on little girls, no thought to watch video games, because the practices in this life, good or bad, multiply hugely in the next life. So yeah, sure, what Wolfgang said, it's like the Christian one, you give up, you know, you wait for heaven. But that's just, you know, we can be sarcastic about that, but this is the logic of how things work. If you expect your oak tree to fully grow in 3 years, you will be only disappointed. So you've got to have the correct expectations. And I think this is where the depth of habits, attachment, trying to stress the depth of attachment. The depth of attachment is far more than we imagine. Buddha's views on attachment are primordially deep. So I think, given that results take time, still, nevertheless, and this is, you know, it's up, we can learn to rejoice that we're not following the habit, and rejoice that there is some progress. Because you can also be very, you know, demanding, and I'm saying brutal, I mean it, Wolfgang. You're very intense, you're very powerful, you're very demanding, you're very accurate, you're very clear with your mind. You also be very brutal against yourself, demanding better results, or maybe a bit more humble and be happy with the results. May I suggest? But that's not just for Wolfgang, it's for all of us. Because always we're going to be dissatisfied with what's, and this is a function of attachment. We're never satisfied. You know, I mean, if I analyze what Wolfgang, he lives a moral life, a good life. He's kind, he's a good husband, a good father. He does his job well. Tick the boxes. If you tick the boxes and saw, you know, written down a description of yourself, you'd think that's an amazing person. But we tend not to be satisfied with ourselves. This is the deepest delusion. This is the deepest function of attachment, never satisfied. So maybe it's good, and I say that, not be so brutal with ourselves, but maybe be rejoicing in some progress, giving the correct, appropriate power to attachment, realizing how deep it is. So just finish with that thought, please, everybody. If there's anything useful there, please put it into practice. Jangchob semchog rinpoche make panam kegyuching kepanyampa mepa yango negonju babashog. That's all. Much love, everybody. See you next week.